The red dot on the security cam burned into my retinas. 2 a.m., I'm staring at my monitor, watching Karen inside my barn. My barn, where my $3 million Navy prototype drone is sitting. Not was sitting, is sitting, until she grabs it, like it's a discounted patio chair from Target on Black Friday. Community property, she shrieks, eyes wild, clutching my baby like it's a prize she is holding upside down. The Navy doesn't even know the damn thing flies yet. The immediate questions hit you like a tidal wave. How the hell did I end up here? How did I even legally buy this place, let alone retrofit a secret lab in the middle of suburbia? And seriously, how did she not trigger every single alarm system? That's the $1 million or $3 million, to be precise, question. To answer it, we have to rewind. 3 months, exactly. Back to the HOA meeting that started it all. I wasn't looking for a war. I spent a decade in deep cover, buried in defense R&D, building tech so cutting edge it made the Pentagon sweat. I'd finally negotiated a remote contract, and all I wanted was a little peace and quiet. Space to breathe. A place for my dog, Radar, to terrorize squirrels. This place had it, big yard, detached barn, a quiet cul-de-sac. It was inside in HOA, sure, but the rules seem inflexible. The barn was grandfathered in before the HOA even existed. I read the agreement twice. Airtight. Then Karen happened. She saw me unloading the metal cases. Classified crates labeled Project Stargazer. Not the real name, of course. That would be bad, but cryptic enough to trigger her spidey sense for suburban wrongdoings. Within a week, I got my first HOA citation. My trash cans were visible from the street. For 12 minutes on collection day. 12. I swear I'm not exaggerating. Then came the welcome basket. She knocked, smiled like a Stepford wife gone rogue, and presented me with banana bread, a scented candle, and a note that radiated pure passive aggression. We take community harmony seriously. Let's keep things neighborly and open. Translation: I saw your suspicious crates, and I'm going to find a reason to make your life a living hell. Her eyes lingered way too long on the barn. Asked if it was a guest house. I just said, hobbies. She hated that answer. From then on, she was always around, walking her yappy Yorkie past my house 6 times a day, minimum, pausing just long enough to case the joint. I even caught her husband, Dale, peering through the barn's side vent like he was scouting for buried treasure. When I asked if he needed help, he damn near broke the sound barrier getting away. Naturally, I installed cameras. Everywhere. Inside, outside, motion-triggered, heat maps. I even slapped a fake under-surveillance sticker on a tree. Took her 2 hours to notice and knock on my door, brandishing a printout of the HOA rules about unauthorized signage. I told her it was part of a wildlife study. I didn't tell anyone what I was actually working on. Can't. Part of the job. But I could make sure everything stayed under wraps, literally. The barn was reinforced, double-locked. The drone prototype was hidden behind a false wall child's play. When you've designed countermeasure algorithms for autonomous naval weapons. Drywall is a joke. And then there was the decoy, a Frankenstein's monster of scrap parts and a disarmed chassis. Looked fancy enough to be real, but was basically a glorified Roomba with wings. I figured if anyone tried to snoop, I'd rather they find the toy version. Karen, bless her heart, didn't know that. Or maybe she did. I can't prove it. But something changed around week 5. The complaints started getting creative. My barn was supposedly producing vibrations that interfered with her Wi-Fi. Her Yorkie barked every time I ran that mysterious humming device. She even claimed the structure was too close to the fence line. Despite the county literally validating the permit 2 years ago, I thought she'd get bored. Embarrassed. Wrong. The real red flag came when I reviewed the camera footage. She was circling the barn during what she probably thought was a stealthy early morning jog, notepad in hand, taking notes. At one point, she stopped, stared directly at the camera, and waved. Not a friendly wave. The kind you get right before a lawsuit. That's when I knew she wasn't going to stop. And that's when I activated the second layer of security. The one she never saw coming. Silent alarm on the main barn door. No sound, no flashing lights. Just a push notification straight to my phone and a complete internal lockdown sequence. Think Mission Impossible, but with more sarcasm and less Tom Cruise. And just in case someone actually got inside, a facial recognition camera with auto record and cloud upload. Best case scenario, a nosy squirrel. Worst case scenario, well, we were about to find out. That night, at 2:13 a.m., on the dot, I got the alert, unauthorized entry. Motion detected inside the barn. I tapped the feed, expecting a raccoon or radar chasing a possum. What I saw was a bleached blonde blur in pink pajama pants stepping over my workshop threshold. Like she owned the place. She had bolt cutters. She had gloves. She had a smug look on her face, like she was about to solve the Da Vinci Code using HOA bylaws. And in her arms my decoy drone. Except it wasn't the decoy. Somehow, someway, Karen had bypassed my false wall and grabbed the real thing. Not the Roomba with wings. The fully functional, still unclassified, testing military-grade flight system that hadn't even gone through its final calibration. And she was holding it upside down. I didn't call the cops. Not immediately. I grabbed a flashlight, opened the hatch entrance from my basement. Yes, I built a tunnel. Don't judge. And came up through the hidden trap door behind the tool rack. When I emerged, she was mid-rant. Something about homeland security, property rights, community trust, and how no one should be allowed to operate dangerous machinery in a suburban neighborhood. That's when I stepped into the light and said, "Funny, Karen." The Navy said the same thing. That's why they gave it to me. She froze, like a raccoon in headlights. Then, slowly, she looked down at what she was holding. It started to beep. Low, steady pulses. She dropped it like it had grown fangs, which, obviously, it hadn't. That would violate about 9 laws. But it was enough to send her backing up, hands raised like I was the one trespassing. And just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, my phone buzzed again. Another alert, second unauthorized motion, this time at the back fence. I tapped the feed and nearly laughed. There, squinting into the dark, was Karen's husband, Dale, holding a walkie-talkie, whispering something like, "Are you in? Did you find the device?" That's when I realized this wasn't just Karen being nosy. This was a full-on operation. I didn't move. I stood there in the shadows of the barn, just letting the absurdity of it all soak in. Karen had broken into my property, bypassed a layered security system she didn't even know existed, and now stood wide-eyed, shaking, beside a prototype that wasn't just expensive. It was technically government property. She was trying to regain composure, but her brain was clearly stuck in that buffering mode where the ego crashes into reality. At full speed, the prototype's faint beeping wasn't dangerous. It was a diagnostic chirp, letting me know someone had handled it without authentication. But to her, it might as well have been a countdown to detonation. I kept my voice calm, casual, even, because nothing makes a guilty person panic more than someone who isn't panicking. Backpedaling, she stammered something about how she was acting on behalf of the community and that she had documented evidence of my suspicious activities. I didn't respond. I walked past her, slowly retrieved the drone from where she dropped it, and inspected it for damage. One of the rotors was bent slightly, and she managed to knock loose a stabilizer module when she dropped it. I felt an actual twinge of pain in my chest. Not for me, but for the poor engineer who was going to have to recalibrate this thing on Monday. Karen was still talking, still trying to spin this into a justified act of neighborhood safety. Something about the HOA bylaws granting inspection rights for suspicious structures. I almost laughed. Almost. I turned to her and asked one simple question. How did you get in? Her mouth opened, but she paused. I could see her calculating the answer, trying to decide whether to admit to the bolt cutters, which were still on the floor, or claim divine right. She went with denial, said the door was already open. That's when I showed her the footage. I pulled out my phone, flipped the screen around, and let her watch herself on crisp infrared night vision slicing through my padlock, like she was on some kind of backyard SEAL team mission. The silence that followed was magnificent. For a moment, I thought she might fake a faint. Instead, She tried to snatch the phone. Big mistake. I stepped back, and her hand closed around nothing. That's when she snapped. Full meltdown. She screamed something about calling the sheriff, said I had military weapons on civilian soil, and that she'd report me to the FBI, the HOA, and her cousin who worked at Homeland. I told her she was welcome to try. I also pointed out that I had not only footage of her breaking and entering, but live audio, timestamp logs, and a federal exemption protecting every piece of tech in this building. She didn't believe me until I walked over to the locked file cabinet and pulled out a laminated copy of my Department of Defense contract. Not the original, obviously. I'm not an idiot, but it was real enough when she saw the seal and the classification levels listed. Her face turned the same color as her pajama pants, a weird blotchy mix of pink and white. She backed toward the exit like I was holding her hostage, muttering something about misunderstandings and how she only meant to ensure safety. I didn't stop her. I just let her leave. But as she stepped outside, I made sure she saw the blinking red light on the camera above the door, the one that had been recording every second of our interaction in high definition. I wanted her to know she had just walked into a storm she wasn't equipped to survive. Once she was gone, I secured the barn, double-checked every inch of the interior, and called the one person I needed to report the incident to, my handler at the contractor liaison office. He wasn't happy. Technically, it was a breach of containment, not severe enough to trigger a full military response, but definitely enough to get flagged. I was told to increase lockdown protocols and let local law enforcement handle the civilian. That last part made me smile. I wasn't going to call the cops. Not yet. I had a better plan. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. I walked radar, waved at neighbors, even stopped to compliment one guy's Halloween decorations. Karen didn't make eye contact. She was power walking her Yorkie in the opposite direction, pretending she hadn't broken into a barn full of restricted technology the night before. But I could feel it under the surface. She was unraveling, because she didn't know how much I knew, or what I'd do with it, and I wasn't about to tell her. What I did instead was upgrade my game. I made sure all the security footage was backed up across 3 different encrypted drives. I also began documenting every interaction I'd ever had with her, every petty citation, every threat, every bogus complaint. I made a binder, tabbed it, and titled it Karen Evidence Log. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being prepared. Because if she was bold enough to break in once, she wouldn't stop. Not until she got burned. Sure enough, it took her less than 48 hours to make her next move. This time, she went to the HOA board. She didn't report the break-in, of course. Instead, she flipped the narrative, claiming she had credible concerns that I was developing illegal surveillance equipment in a residential neighborhood. Said she had reason to believe I was flying experimental drones over private property. The HOA ate it up. They loved a good witch hunt, especially one that gave them a chance to flex their imaginary authority. I was summoned to a compliance review meeting. They used those exact words. Like they were the CIA. I showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, carrying a box labeled Exhibit A. Inside were a bunch of clearly harmless consumer drones, the kind you buy at Best Buy. I explained that I was developing backyard pollination bots for agricultural study. I even played a clip of one hovering around a sunflower, while classical music played in the background. The board was confused, but impressed. Karen, however, was fuming. She knew it was fake, but she couldn't prove it. I watched her clench her jaw so tight I thought she might grind her veneers to dust. After the meeting, she pulled me aside in the parking lot and hissed something about how this isn't over. I smiled and said, "Oh, I know. That's why I brought popcorn." She stormed off, nearly tripping over her leash. I could have ended it there. I could have turned in the footage, filed charges, even gone full scorched earth. But that's not my style. I wanted her to keep going, because every time she did, she dug herself deeper. Every lie, every complaint, every tantrum fuel for the fire she didn't even know she was sitting on. Then, one night, I got a text from a friend on the HOA board. Just 5 words, she's filing an emergency petition. That's when I knew things were about to escalate. Karen wasn't done. She was doubling down. And whatever she was planning next, I was already 2 steps ahead. The emergency petition, as it turned out, was Karen's masterstroke of suburban sabotage. Or at least she thought it was. She called for a special HOA board vote to review what she dramatically titled The Threat at Lot 47, which, for those keeping score, was me. She claimed I was operating unlicensed surveillance drones that violated community airspace and posed a serious danger to domestic tranquility. Her words, not mine. She even quoted a made-up statute about flight paths over residential zones. I knew because I looked it up. Didn't exist. But the thing about HOA letters is half the time they don't rely on actual law. They rely on intimidation, noise, and groupthink. And Karen was an expert at all 3. She passed out flyers that looked like government warnings, complete with grainy black and white photos of my barn, taken from what appeared to be her upstairs bathroom window. One had the drone circled in red with a giant question mark next to it, like this was an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. Another one had my face, blurry and mid-yawn, captioned, "Do you know what he's building?" Honestly, I kept that one. I looked like a sleep-deprived Bond villain. It was kind of flattering. The meeting was set for Friday evening. Prime HOA Theater. I spent the afternoon preparing a presentation so wildly sanitized and absurd that even the most paranoid retiree would believe it. I titled it Community Robotics for Environmental Harmony and filled it with graphs showing how my couplination drones improve local flora health and reduced wasp populations. I even included a testimonial from my elderly neighbor, Miss Edna, who I bribed with raspberry jam to say the buzzing helped her roses bloom. Edna loved drama more than gardening, so she was happy to play the part. When I arrived, Karen was already at the community center podium, wearing what could only be described as her Patriot Act chic outfit, red blazer, pearl earrings, and a manila folder so thick she needed 2 hands to hold it. The room was full. Neighbors, board members, even a couple of people I didn't recognize. Probably her cousins from whatever Facebook group she recruited them from. She began with a speech that sounded like it was stolen from a Cold War documentary, full of phrases like unregulated technology, neighborhood surveillance, and threat to our children. She pointed at me like I was on trial for espionage. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up slowly, carrying a sleek-looking drone the size of a grapefruit. It whirred softly and hovered beside me, blinking blue like a sci-fi pet. I introduced it as Polly, my prototype for eco-safe lawn management. I said it could identify weeds, water plants, and sing classical music to tomatoes. I smiled through every sentence and watched the board melt. One woman actually clapped when I said Polly could hum along to gardening podcasts. Karen's jaw was locked so tight I thought she'd snap her mandibles. She interrupted, waving one of her blurry photos in the air, shouting about how I was lying and how these weren't gardening tools but high-tech spying machines. She demanded the board enter my property for inspection. That's when I pulled out my binder, the one labeled Karen Evidence Log, and calmly informed the room that not only had she trespassed, but I had video footage, audio logs, and photographic proof of her breaking into my property and damaging federal equipment. The moment I said federal equipment, the board went still. Karen froze. One of the older board members actually leaned back like someone had just fired a shot. Across the room, I handed over a sealed envelope which contained a legal letter from my contractor liaison, explaining my federal exemptions and reminding the HOA of its legal limitations. It was written in very polite legalese, but the gist was clear: keep pushing, and you'll be subpoenaed. Karen didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. She just sat there blinking, gripping the edge of the table like it was the last lifeboat on the Titanic. The board declined her petition with a unanimous vote. One member even apologized to me afterward, mumbling something about how they didn't know she'd gone that far. But I wasn't done. That meeting was just the first act. A few days later, I hosted a drone demonstration for the entire neighborhood. I sent out colorful flyers inviting families to Drone Day in the park, complete with refreshments, lawn games, and a display of my non-lethal aerial prototypes That line alone probably gave Karen hives. I set up a small course in the cul-de-sac and programmed a few harmless units to fly synchronized patterns to music. Kids laughed, neighbors clapped, and even the grumpiest HOA members couldn't deny it was impressive. Karen showed up too, of course. She didn't participate, but she hovered near the back with her arms crossed, watching like a villain in a low-budget spy film. At one point, one of the drones flew a little too close to her head, and she shrieked, causing the Yorkie in her purse to bark hysterically. That ended up on video. So did her yelling at a 7-year-old who accidentally bumped into her folding chair. I edited the footage together with some dramatic music and posted it anonymously to a local community meme page. It went semi-viral within 2 days. It had 15,000 views and a comment thread so savage it made Reddit look like a church newsletter. Her reputation began to spiral. People started murmuring about her behind her back. Someone printed out the meme and taped it to the bulletin board at the community center. HOA members who once nodded politely at her began to cross the street when they saw her walking. She responded by doubling down, sending out long, paranoid emails to the HOA about ongoing threats to neighborhood values. She claimed my drones were interfering with her Wi-Fi again. I responded by offering to install a signal booster near her house, publicly, with a smile. The board laughed. She didn't. That's when she tried the nuclear option. She filed a formal complaint with the city accusing me of operating an unlicensed commercial business on residential property. The thing is, I knew she would. I'd been waiting, anticipating. So I had already cleared everything with the city zoning office months ago, just in case. When the city inspector arrived, I greeted him with coffee and a tour. He left with a thank you card and one of my fake poly drones as a novelty gift. He told me I was probably the most prepared homeowner he'd ever met. Meanwhile, I prepared my next move. Karen had launched a smear campaign, a failed petition, and a false report to the city. She had trespassed, tampered with equipment, and made herself the self-appointed enemy of progress. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't the only one watching her now. I'd reached out to a local investigative journalist who had been covering stories on HOA abuse and suburban overreach. When I showed her the footage, the documents, the obsessive email chains, her eyes lit up. She said, "This is gold." Karen thought she was battling a neighbor with a shed full of toys. She didn't realize she picked a fight with someone who spent years out hinking military threats, with better resources and far worse intentions than a middle-aged woman. On a neighborhood power trip. She wasn't playing chess. She wasn't even playing checkers. She was playing Candyland on a minefield. And then, just when I thought she'd finally burned out, I got a knock on my door late one evening. I opened it to find one of the board members, pale, holding a folded letter. No words, just a nervous handoff. It was a summons. Karen was suing me in civil court for emotional distress and property devaluation. That was the moment I realized she hadn't hit bottom yet. She was still digging. The moment I unfolded that paper and read the words civil complaint, I actually laughed. Not a loud, victorious laugh. Just a short, stunned chuckle. Like the kind you let out when someone accuses you of mind-controlling their garden gnomes, or stealing their dreams through the air vents. Karen was suing me, not for trespassing, not for defamation, but for emotional distress and, my personal favorite, property devaluation due to a hostile technological presence. That phrase alone was worth framing. According to her, my existence, and more specifically my barn, had lowered her home's value and subjected her to unbearable psychological stress. I imagined her sitting at a desk, dramatically sobbing over Zillow prices. The Yorkie offering moral support as she wrote down claims like he has cameras that follow me, and his drones are watching my dog. The thing was, Karen didn't understand the game she was playing. She thought this would scare me, that I'd be rattled. Maybe that I'd quietly move out just to avoid the legal hassle. What she didn't realize was I had spent the better part of a decade filing government patent paperwork and sitting through contract briefings that make tax law look like a bedtime story. I once got a drone cleared through 5 federal departments and to foreign allies in under 6 months. A civil case in a sleepy county courthouse? That was Tuesday morning material. So I did what anyone would do when faced with absurdity dressed up in legalese. I prepared. I compiled everything: footage, timestamps, correspondence, records of every citation she'd issued or attempted to issue through the HOA. I even included weather logs and satellite images for the night she broke in, just for flavor. But I didn't just prepare for defense. I went on offense. With the help of a very sharp attorney who owed me a favor from a past project, I filed a counterclaim: trespassing, property damage, harassment, and defamation. The best part? I had proof. Multiple layers of it. This wasn't just her word against mine. This was her word against every camera, every email, and every smug voicemail she'd left on the HOA hotline that I'd quietly requested copies of. Through a public records request. Words spread quickly. Nothing travels faster in a suburban neighborhood than a lawsuit, especially one involving Karen. Neighbors who had been neutral started whispering. A few who'd once seemed to side with her now avoided her entirely. She painted herself into a corner and couldn't figure out why the paint was still wet. The HOA, sensing a PR disaster, released a public statement that they were not affiliated with Karen's civil actions and had no current concerns regarding my property or conduct. That was a beautifully phrased way of saying, please don't sue us too. And then came the moment I didn't see coming. A black SUV pulled into my driveway a few days before the hearing. Out stepped two men in black polos, one with a clipboard, the other with a badge. Not police. Military? Well, civilian contractors under military contract, like me. They weren't here about Karen's lawsuit. They were here about the drone. Specifically, the footage I had submitted showing Karen handling the prototype. One of them, a stone-faced guy with a clipboard thicker than Karen's complaint, explained that the incident had triggered an internal review. Technically, she had come into contact with restricted tech without clearance. That fell into a gray area that required some quiet escalation. They asked for copies of the footage, which I had ready in triplicate. They also asked if I wanted to press federal charges. I said I hadn't yet, but I was open to the idea, depending on how far Karen wanted to take this. They exchanged a look that said, without saying, they hoped I would. One of them muttered something about people like her making their jobs harder. Then they left, but not before reminding me that anything sensitive should now be locked down under protocol. Until further notice. That's when I realized Karen hadn't just stirred up drama. She kicked the hornet's nest. And some of those hornets wore government IDs. The hearing was anticlimactic, which, honestly, disappointed me a little. Karen showed up with a new lawyer, someone clearly plucked from a personal injury billboard downtown. Her arguments were flimsy, her evidence laughable. Her lawyer tried to introduce screenshots from the neighborhood meme page as character defamation. My lawyer objected so hard I thought he might physically combust. When it was my turn, we walked the court through every detail, like a very dry Netflix docuseries. The judge didn't say much, but I could tell from his expression that he mentally checked out somewhere. Between unauthorized aerial buzzing and emotional trauma from synthetic humming. My counterclaim, however, landed hard. The footage of her breaking in, the bolt cutters, the damage report from the drone, her wild accusations sent to multiple neighbors, the social media meltdown, it was all there. The judge dismissed her suit in 10 minutes flat and said mine had merit. Her lawyer looked like he regretted accepting the case for whatever discounted rate she offered. Karen stormed out before the session even adjourned, red-faced, barking something about conspiracies and corruption. After the ruling, I didn't see her for a while. Her blinds stayed closed. No more HOA complaints. No more surprise visits. A few weeks later, a moving truck appeared outside her house. Quiet. No drama. Just box after box leaving. Word around the neighborhood was that she'd sold at a loss, claiming she needed a fresh start somewhere quieter. I heard she moved to a community with stricter rules, one with a drone ban. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. In the aftermath, things changed. The HOA held a vote to revise its charter and put strict limitations on board powers. A few members stepped down, citing stress. I was asked to join the new oversight committee, which I politely declined. I didn't move here to play politics, but I did offer to lend my drone tech to help the neighborhood with security and maintenance. One of the neighbors joked about naming a patrol drone after Karen. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. And the barn is still there, still humming. Only now it's equipped with a new prototype. Sleeker, quieter, smarter. I named it K1. Just a letter and a number. Simple, unassuming. But every time it lifts off, I remember the night a clipboard-wielding Karen tried to bring it down. I remember the bolt cutters, the panic, the unraveling. And I remember the lesson she never learned. When you poke around places you don't understand, especially places with classified military contracts, sometimes the buzzing isn't just annoying. Sometimes it's the sound of justice warming up its rotors.